Ray Wheatley for Fight News. I'm here with Grantlee Kieza, who's the leading boxing writer in Australia and also works for the Courier Mail in Brisbane. How are you, Grantlee?
Very well, thank you, Ray.
Grantlee, I'd like to go through your career in boxing, mate. It's been a big career you've had. 40 years, I think, in boxing now.
Yeah, nearly 40 years. Makes me feel a bit old.
So, mate, you left school back in 1979?
1979 I left school, yeah, and I started work on a newspaper in Brisbane. It was an afternoon newspaper called the Brisbane Telegraph.
Okay.
And I started covering boxing for that paper. Some of the big fights in Brisbane at the time, we had some good fighters up here called Steve Axel and Hector Thompson. Hector Thompson was towards the end of his career then, but he'd been a great fighter who fought Duran in the 1970s. He was still a pretty big star in Brisbane at the time. The fights used to be at a place called Festival Hall, which has given way to an apartment block now, but it was the main sporting indoor arena in Brisbane at the time, and it hosted many, many big fights over the years, including fighters such as Tony Mundine, Hector Thompson, Frank Ropus fought up here, a guy called Steve Dennis, who was a terrific puncher, Steve Axel, of course, a number of really good fighters. A pretty good American fighter came out here a couple of times called Greg Stevens.
Yeah.
So
beat Hector Thompson.
Yeah, he beat Hector Thompson. They were really good days for boxing in Queensland then.
So you were interested in boxing while you were in school, or just after you left school?
Yeah, well, while I was a schoolboy, I guess Muhammad Ali inspired a lot of people to be interested in boxing. He was such a charismatic figure. And I grew up following boxing and doing a little bit of boxing training and following boxing. And it was I always thought that it was a great sport to write about because the characters were just so fantastic and so interesting and so compelling. And the action in the boxing ring was just so captivating because it was so real and so intense and so pure. And I always loved boxing. I always remember the line of George Foreman that boxing was the heavyweight champion of sports, and it really was. For a journalist to cover, you couldn't meet characters anywhere in any other sport like you can in the fight game.
After seeing fights like Rumble in the Jungle and Thriller in Manila.
When you think about more Academy Award winning movies about sport have been about boxing. Boxing has dominated sporting movies as far as awards go. When you think of movies like Rocky and Million Dollar Baby, The Harder They Fall, Fat City, all great movies based on boxing.
Yep. Oh, that's great. Then you moved down to Sydney and you started work at the Telegraph newspaper.
The Daily Telegraph in
You're only
Sydney. 19
years of age?
Yeah, I was very young. I moved down there. I made the move to the big city of Sydney, and I ended up working there for about 25 years. And of course, I covered boxing as soon as I got there. I was only there a few weeks when we had a remarkable fight at the Sydney Opera House, which of course is normally a great concert venue, but they decided to have a fight there. The promoter Tommy Rodonicus and John Singleton, and of course the only time they ever had a fight at the Opera House, it ended up in an all-in brawl in the ring, and they haven't had a boxing match there since.
That was it. That was the first and last boxing promotion there.
One only, yeah.
But and then, mate, you started training over at Johnny Lewis's gym. You had a little young amateur there, Jeff Fenech.
Yeah, I started going to Johnny's gym, the Newtown Police Youth Club. He had a number of fighters there, but the one that really kicked on was the young amateur kid called Jeff Fenech. He was the New South Wales flyweight champion when I first went there, amateur champion, and we obviously became friends. And Johnny liked me, and he thought I was a trustworthy guy that he could sort of rely on, and he made me his right-hand man in the gym, and I became the corner man for all his fighters. And I was just in the right place at the right time. That's all it really was. And Jeff Fenech, I was in his corner for all his victories as a professional fighter, and I was just so lucky that he was such a great fighter. But you're also the publicity machine behind. Well, I guess so. I guess I helped drive their career, and I like to think that I've helped Jeff Horn build this big enormous fight up in Brisbane against Manny Pacquiao. Because when I first met Jeff Horn, he was a school teacher out at a state school in Brisbane, and he was just embarking on his professional career, and it was quite interesting. He, even back then, he had the dream of being a world champion, but it was a school teacher with a classroom of young kids.
That's amazing. Yeah, you know what I mean. You think like 30 years ago, You were getting behind Jeff Fenech,
Yep.
and he rose to be a great champion.
Yeah.
And it looks like this could be happening all over again with Jeff Horn.
Well, they're very similar in their, not so much in their personality, but in their mental strength and their physical strength. They're real goers in the boxing ring.
Yeah, no else. Now, also, besides Jeff Fenech, they had Frank Bruner, Joe Bugner.
Yep.
And you were with Joe Bugner when he went overseas and fought Frank Bruno. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, well, Johnny became such a successful trainer through the success he had with Jeff Fenech that he drew other fighters there, including also Jeff Harding. And when Joe Bugner decided to make a comeback in Australia, he went to Johnny to train and with Bill Morty to promote him. So I became Joe Bugner's man in the corner, the chief second for Joe. And the biggest fight that I was involved with Joe was against Frank Bruno in the UK. It was at the Tottenham Hotspur soccer ground. It was a very cold night. I remember it was approaching winter time, and they still had nearly 40,000 people there. It was quite incredible. The fight before that, I'd been in Joe's corner when he beat Greg Page, the great champion.
I was there that night.
The great champion from Louisville, Kentucky, from Muhammad Ali's hometown.
He won the world title.
Yeah, Joe beat Greg Page pretty well. He fought very well against Greg Page, but he only had a very short time to get ready to fight Frank Bruno. It was only like 3.5 weeks because winter time was coming on in the UK, and they wanted to have an outdoor fight against Frank Bruno. They knew it would be a huge extravaganza. Joe had to either take the deal or forget it, so he took the deal, went over against Frank Bruno, and he went all right for a few rounds, but Frank, I think at the time was 25. Joe was pushing 38, nearly 38, and Frank was just too young, too mobile, too strong, too vigorous. But Joe really gave a wholehearted performance. He even refused to stay down when, at one stage, Frank Bruno had him up against the ropes and Joe sort of slumped down, and Frank Bruno was going boom on his head, like the big sledgehammers, not punching him, cracking him on the top of the head. But Joe managed to pull himself upright and we threw the towel in. But I'll never forget the heart that Joe showed in that fight. Even though he was way past his best, he still had an enormous.
Great experience for you, Grant. You're only in your early 20s.
Yeah. As I say, I was in the right place at the right time. I was mixing with all these great fighters and
Now, at the same time you're writing for the newspapers, you started off a boxing magazine, Fist Boxing Magazine.
Yeah, we had the Fist, and before that we had one called Australian Boxer, and one called Pacific Fighter. I used to put them together on the kitchen table at home, and with my mate Arthur Stanley and my friend Mitchell Barnes. We put a number of magazines together, and we were always just trying to promote the interest in boxing and share the enthusiasm that we had for it with a readership.
And we worked together from 92 to 2013 with the Walder Boxing. And for 10 years with Title Fight. So we had all that experience. Grant, you also wrote the history of Australian boxing, first in 96. Which was later made into a video.
The first book was called Australian Boxing, The Illustrated History, and that became a DVD called That's Boxing, where I managed to go and interview, I was very lucky, I managed to go and interview all these great champions, going right back to the 1930s. I went up to a place called Dungog, up past Newcastle in New South Wales, and interviewed Fred Henneberry, who in the 1930s had been the great fighter at Sydney Stadium, but he'd also fought at Madison Square Garden. He beat Ken Overland, who was the world middleweight champion. He was a great fighter. He fought George Abrams at Madison Square Garden. He was a great champion from a golden era of boxing.
Fantastic.
He fought Archie Moore in Sydney. And
there you go, Ron Richards 11 times.
He fought Ron Richards 10 times, and Ron Richards had even decked Archie Moore in their first fight. So they were great champions.
You interviewed George Barnes, a great Australian fighter.
Barnes, Vic Patrick, guys, Tommy Burns, all those great champions from Australian boxing history. I was very, very lucky to speak to many of them, because many of them have passed away now, and it was a great era in Australian boxing.
And Grantlee, you brought out another one that was just over a year ago.
The National Library of Australia had so many classic photographs, and they just wanted a forum to share them with the rest of Australia. So that book was called Boxing in Australia, and it was a look at the impact of boxing on Australian society over many years.
And Grantlee, you were very good friends with Lovemore Nadeau, the former IBF welterweight champ. You travelled with Lovemore to Mexico. Whereabouts in Mexico?
It was at Veracruz. He fought a fairly well-known fighter called Canelo Alvarez.
Slightly well-known,
That was, I tell you, Lovemore, probably the bravest fighter of all time. He was nearly 40 years old when he fought Canelo. Canelo was 20. He was in a big stadium full of Mexicans. Not much support for Lovemore except for our corner, and Lovemore went out there and gave him a good fight for 12 rounds, just as he had against Miguel Cotto many years before in Las Vegas. He gave his all against...
And you never looked in danger of going down at any stage?
Canelo was loading up trying to hit him, but Lovemore just kept him at bay with the jab all night, and even though Canelo still won a comfortable decision, Lovemore made the fight very competitive all the way through. And as I say, there's never been a braver fighter than Lovemore to do.
And recently, getting back to what we were talking about previously, you've been getting behind Jeff Horn.
Yeah.
And he's about to do a battle with Manny Pacquiao.
Yeah, well, you know, Jeff Horn, he's a tremendous athlete, very focused. And the great thing about this fight, and I think it's a lesson to boxers around the world, you don't have to be a creep. You don't have to trash talk. You don't have to badmouth anyone. This fight has been between Pacquiao and Horn is two gentlemen fighting. The fight is being sold on the merits of their boxing ability and their talent in the ring. They don't have to trash talk. They don't have to badmouth. This is two old-fashioned, really good guys, real gentlemen. A great advertisement for boxing. I interviewed Bob Arum the other day, and he said this is a fight between two exemplary human beings.
Yeah,
and it's just a great thing for boxing on the world stage here in Brisbane, Australia.
Well, Grantlee, you've done a lot for Australian boxing, mate, and you'll be recognised on the 16th of July.
Thank you. Yeah.
Up here in Queensland, where you'll go into the Queensland Boxing Hall of Fame. So congratulations for that,
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a great honour. Thank you.
Okay, Grant. Once again, mate, thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Ray. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Grant.